Okay, so we are on our second chapter of the Pursuit of God from A.W. Tozer. This is the chapter in your version. If it's not given a number, then the name is The Blessedness of Possessing Nothing. So we're all on the same topic at least. Okay, good. And this one was nice and short. And I think maybe you can see again where he writes like a preacher. You know, this almost feels like, if not a little devotional that a preacher might write, you could almost envision him preaching this. At least I could almost kind of hear a voice speaking it rather than just reading it like an author might. And that's just one of the things that that might be kind of, you know, particular about him as an author. So he starts off this passage with a very well-known, you might even call it a famous quotation from the Sermon on the Mount. As far as the Beatitudes are concerned, if anybody knows a Beatitude at all, odds are they know this one, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And those, the Beatitudes, which are very familiar to a lot of folks, even non-church folks, have kind of some passing familiarity with the concept of the thought. And again, if somebody happens to know one, they probably know this one. Why do you think, and there's 8 Beatitudes, and I know this, I know there are 8 because when you see them listed out, it's a little confusing. Are there 8 of them? Are there 7 of them? Are there 6 of them? Because it kind of depends on where you draw dividing lines. But I was just talking to the youth group about my Israel trip from a few years ago, and the Church of the Beatitudes, which they built roughly where they assume the Sermon on the Mount was given, is an octagonal church. It's an 8-sided building to represent one side for each of the Beatitudes. As the story goes, I assume this is correct, but way back, I think if this was maybe in the late 60s or maybe into the mid 70s, I'm not sure when, but Lila, you might know this. The rector of St. David's at the time had gone to Israel, had visited the Church of the Beatitudes, and was so struck by the unique architecture that they built the St. David's sanctuary to have 8 sides, just like the Church of the Beatitudes. So you have a time frame on that by any chance? First of all, does the story sound right?
That was Peter Fleming.
Peter Fleming.
And,
In the 70s. Okay. All right.
I was there because when I first started working there, they had church in the parish hall.
Oh, okay.
And they didn't have that thing.
All right. So you know, we've got insider baseball here going on because Lila was working at the church at the time, and she was saying when she started, they were still meeting in the parish hall. So she can pretty well pinpoint this into the 70s at some point, maybe the mid 70s or such. But does that, I mean, do you know that story? Am I telling a true story here, or is this like rumor and innuendo?
Yeah, it's pretty true.
Okay. So anyway, it's kind of neither here nor there, but I thought it was just sort of a fun little connection. So why, if somebody knows any of the Beatitudes, and they might not even know them as a Beatitude, but maybe they just know, you know, that Jesus guy said something. Why this one? Why do you think people remember, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven?
They don't have anything.
Because they don't have anything?
Poverty is widespread.
Poverty is widespread, okay. I feel like I'm getting a field here, but just for the sake of things. Here's a little economic principle. This is the opposite of what I think people assume, maybe, unless you get them to think through it. Once they think through it, most people are in agreement. But this is, it's sort of basic economics, but it's become a little controversial. But the natural state of humanity is poverty. The natural state of humanity is poverty. I say that, and I'm trying to pick the terms carefully, because I'm not saying that poverty is good, but I'm saying when we describe something, in its natural state, we mean without any outside interference, as though it were to just kind of happen. The natural state of the buffalo. It's born on the plains and it walks around eating grass and stuff, and until it gets moved, or until it gets interrupted, or until it gets shot or whatever, like it would just sort of continue on the way that it was born, unless something from outside makes an impact. The natural state of humanity is poverty because we are born with what? Nothing. Here's the words of Job. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. This is also true, not just in a philosophical sense, but imagine the proverbial deserted island. Let's say your mother was pregnant with you in a shipwreck, and she gives birth, swims to shore and then gives birth and dies. What do you have? You got nothing. What if she lives long enough that you can, be awake and alert and survive, and then she dies? What do you have? You have whatever it is she was able to build or create until you got to that age. If the way we're born, we come into this world with nothing, and we can look around us, especially in our nation, and we can see all the things that already have been built. There's, roads, and there's buildings, and there's economic system. There's a social safety net, there's a culture around us, and all that kind of stuff. But those are all kind of interventions to our basic nature. You don't have to be born in America. You don't have to be born in the 20th or 21st century. You could have been born at some other time. That is common to humanity. Our circumstances and the amenities and the resources around us are not common. What's actually universal is poverty. So the benefits of society, the benefits of wealth creation, the benefits of the resources that you happen to be around or that you happen to use effectively, the fact that you came from wealthier parents, all that other sort of stuff is secondary to your nature. It's a subtle, but I think not an unimportant point, certainly not economically, because people will talk about rights. You have a right to this and a right to that. And I will say those are rights other than the inalienable rights granted by God. We have no inherent rights to wealth, riches, or resources. That doesn't mean we shouldn't share them. We shouldn't, try to lift everybody up. We shouldn't be looking out for one another, all that kind of stuff. But it's to say, if we did nothing, what would we have? Nothing.
Nothing.
You got to do something to get something. That was my 2-minute economics lecture, but it applies, I think, back into our chapter and back into the theme of Tozer for those same words of Job, right? God granted us life when we were born, but what else did we have? In a sense, nothing. In another sense, everything.
Shelter. Food.
Well, and those were things that we wind up receiving because somebody gave them to us. The baby that comes out of the mother will live not long at all unless cared for very purposefully, very directly from other people. If you are not fed as a newborn, you will die. If you are not kept warm as a newborn, you will die. And that's above and beyond all of the other secondary things like, medications or treatments or, things that will help you thrive. But, a newborn left on their own won't last long at all. They are just far too vulnerable, far too weak, and they are utterly dependent. What is it like? A horse gives birth to a foal, and the foal like stands up immediately and could theoretically take care of themselves, like if they had to. Some shark species, they're kind of they develop either in utero or in an egg case, and they come out small but fully developed, like bite your finger off, little shark kind of stuff. But humans, we are utterly dependent on someone's care from the moment of our birth. I think we can extrapolate from that pretty much everything else that Tozer is talking about, right? For whatever it is that we have extra from our life, he would say comes from where? Scripture would say comes from where? It comes from God. From the Father of lights, from whom all good gifts are given. So even if it's our mother feeding us or our father keeping us warm and sheltered, don't we get even those basics from the gracious hand of God in an ultimate sense? We had no control over who our mother was. We have no control over, when we're born at least, how our mother or our father or whoever happens to be there will care for us. Ultimately, even at the beginning, we were reliant on God making provision through other people.
I have this plaque in my kitchen that says, "The best things in life are not things."
The best things in life are not things. Nice. I like that. I like that. What are the best things in life then?
Love.
Love. Not a thing. Can't quantify it. Can't even qualify it. Air. Bird singing.
Rain.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. These experiences of life that there's a commercial that I watch a lot of YouTube, and it's super popular on YouTube right now. Like, not popular, but it's present a lot. And it's somebody saying, you're not going to get to your deathbed and wish you had one more thing. But what if it was one more experience? And it was pushing, like, I don't think an airline or something, like go see the world. But I think the sentiment is experiences over things. And that's something that I've been taught many times in a variety of capacities, not the least of which is thinking about the raising of your children. Don't just give them stuff, give them experiences. Whether it's a trip that they can remember or just time spent with you. They don't need, the extra toy so much as they need the security of the time and attention of an adult who cares for them. Weren't the Beatles right that you can't buy me love? And something like that, while it is almost impossible to pin down or really even define, but it becomes essential and critical. You ever come across those studies? These were mostly from like I think they were like from the 50s, maybe, about, I think these were in like Soviet orphanages where they were finding all of these orphans were dying in these mass orphanages until the intervention was to have somebody hold the baby like an hour a day every day, and then all of a sudden it sort of completely reversed the trend. Like they're getting the same amount of warmth, the same amount of food, the same what you would assume is the basics of life, but the babies that weren't being touched and held and they were not thriving and they were dying at an alarming rate.
That's why a lot of these hospitals have people come in and sick.
People sick, yeah.
Babies.
This is very timely with baby Callie Wortman. This is Phil and Gail's first great-grandchild, who was born quite premature and has still not come home yet. It's been several weeks now. And so I'll get these little picture updates periodically from Gail. And it was just the other day, like Saturday, I think maybe, where she and Phil got to hold the baby for the very first time. And you're talking about, teeny tiny baby that's in all these machines and incubators and all that kind of stuff. But even what looks very heavily technological, the neonatal care units are very purposeful about trying to have the mother hold the baby as much as possible. And there's just something about it. Haven't we had that reinforced even as adults over the past 2 years of pandemic?
Yes.
You can have stuff, but if you're separated away from people, you're missing something absolutely essential. Okay, so
Even at church, not being able to touch someone's hand and wish them peace, that was difficult.
it's been very strange, very strange. We're just now starting to, get back to, a few more steps towards normalcy, but there's some things that we're not doing, for years until it just became so expected, I didn't even have to say it. We would get to the point of the end of the Eucharistic prayer where the Lord's Prayer came in, and I would say, as we join hands, and people would, hold hands with people next to it, they would even cross the aisle to go from pew to pew. And I thought it was very beautiful. It was very poignant. It always seemed like a very significant activity that reinforced what we were praying. The unity of the body of Christ. And I know some people have already started holding hands again, but I haven't said anything, I haven't directed it, and we're not going to, at least for a little while still. But it's like you miss that. And even if you weren't a big hand holder before, or you weren't a big hugger, or you were kind of I'm better on the periphery sort of person, and that's okay, because there are times where I want that too. 2 years worth of being forcibly separated out, I think, has worn on everybody.
Yes.
Even the curmudgeonly among us. So let me go back to that beatitude for a second, because I think there's some significance in this as a foundational text to everything else that he writes. So I've suggested that if people know beatitude, they know this one. And we kind of talked about the sort of the universality of poverty. In an academic sense, in an economic sense, we're all born poor in that manner. It's a natural state of humanity. But we could also say that poverty seems to be present in every era of society. Like we can't think at a time in the past where there wasn't such a thing as being poor. And it's really difficult to think in the future and come up with the idea of a society, outside of, say, Star Trek, where there is no such thing as poverty. It just seems kind of ubiquitous. Jesus himself even says, you always have the poor with you. And I don't think that is not intended for us to use it as an excuse. Oh, well, they're going to be poor anyway, I shouldn't do anything about it. I'm just saying, I think he's affirming that it seems to go hand in hand with the brokenness of the world. I don't think that's a godly intention. I just think it's an observation about the consequences of life. So why else could this be such a well-known verse? Blessed are the poor. I'm going to make the suggestion, especially, go ahead, say that.
Well, just looking at the last part, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That
Yes.
certainly is
I think that's definitely a part of it. It's not just blessed are the poor because they will, because some of them, blessed are the hungry for they will be satisfied. That sounds good, and we all want to be satisfied. But this, like the reward in this one seems extra desired. The kingdom of heaven. Oh, now you're talking. Like that's about as good as it gets. So I will definitely remember that one. I absolutely think that's a part of it. It's very memorable because it's connected to something that seems so significant. I want to make one more suggestion about poverty. Anybody else? Okay. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And he's going to spend a lot of time helping us go through the personal meaning of being poor in spirit. But I'm going to make the suggestion that as soon as we qualify it with in spirit, every person has felt poor at some point. The richest, most powerful person in the world has felt poor at some point. And that doesn't necessarily mean like I have no money in my pocket, but it does mean a poverty of spirit where everybody has felt lonely. Everybody has felt like they're on the outs. Everybody has felt like the world's against them. Everybody has felt like they've been thrown under the bus. Everybody has felt like they're in it alone and they're not sure how it's going to work out. And there's no amount of money in your bank account that will ensure you never feel that way. As a matter of fact, the people who have a lot of money spend a lot of time both ensuring that money stays there and accumulating more. That's just sort of the nature of it. When is enough enough is an actual question people ask because there's not an obvious answer for anybody. So that's it might feel like a lot of background, but a lot of what we get in this chapter, I think, is trying to address these questions. It starts off with a very kind of clear reminder that in the creation story of Genesis, especially Genesis 2, that there's a separation, there's a bifurcation between stuff and humanity. As a matter of fact, that's why when you start talking the creation story, depending on what you're talking about, you have the tendency to say Genesis or Genesis 2. Like if you just say Genesis, well, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are not identical. They're intended to work together. How does creation go in a rough sense in Genesis 1? Anybody remember the difference between the two? Okay, so Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so Genesis 1 is like on the days of creation. God makes something and says, it is good, right? And you go all the way through, and on the seventh day, the Lord rested. Genesis 2 kind of picks up with the story of Adam and Eve, where God creates man out of the dust of the earth and breathes life, creates man. Now, does that happen within day 6 of the first chapter? Is it happening after? All that kind of stuff is to say, it's almost like there's a point to each story and they work together, but because they're trying to make a different point, they approach it from a different angle. If we were talking about the days of creation in Genesis 1, it's kind of impersonal as far as people are concerned. People don't really come up. We create the light and separate from the dark. We create the firmament and separate that out. And we create the waters and the trees and the birds of the air and all this kind of stuff. The sun and the moon and the stars all come in there. But all of these are still these are all created things. And then it's almost like the story finishes and it restarts to say, now let's talk about God and us. And then you get this very intimate, God and Adam, you can almost picture forming of the dust, like making something out of clay. And then breathing life. And then there's this discussion. And then man's lonely. And so God puts him to sleep and takes the rib, and then now there's Eve, and he puts them together, and they're talking, and they're given stuff to do. And we're going to go into Genesis 3. We're going to talk about the tree and the garden and doing work and the temptation, all that kind of stuff. It goes from very, very broad, very expansive, over and above in the days of creation. This is powerful, profound, cosmic kind of stuff. And then it kind of restarts and almost says, come close. Let's look eye to eye. I want to tell you a story about me and you. And so there's already that separation, that bifurcation, the stuff of creation and the intimacy, the relationship, God and humanity. So what's the problem with mixing the two together? Us and stuff.
Well, God gave us Adam, all kinds of gifts. I mean, there were thousands of things that he had access to, but he needed to keep God as the center. And when he made a change and decided that how what he wanted to know was more important than God, then you have a separation.
That's right. That's right. This is an argument that I will make kind of theologically, philosophically. I think it's very defensible. The specifics, I think, are unknowable in this mortal life, but I'm convinced of a few things. Number one, animals do not sin. Creation is broken, so creation suffers, including animals. We could even argue there is a separation between God and his creation, which is a consequence of sin. But rocks don't sin, stars don't sin. I'm going to say even animals don't sin because their natures are their natures. They've been kind of broken because of humanity being separated out from God, but not what they suffer is the consequence of us, not the consequence of themselves. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And it's part of the reason why I am absolutely convinced that animals, God's creation, will be a part of his redemption. When he makes the world new, that nothing he has created, he loves what he has made. And he will remake it new and redeem it. And I feel no shame in telling people, just like I told my own kids, about seeing your pets in heaven. I feel no shame about that. Scripture itself alludes to animals in heaven. So I see a creation that God loves, stuff, matter, he loves. What is the incarnation if not God saying, I love what I've made so much, I will become it to save it. But it's still stuff. And even if a rock can't sin, we can. So when we mix and match those categories, I think it allows us to take the easy way out. Well, the human is just an animal. Now, in scientific categorization, I am not opposed at all of putting us in the animal kingdom. Fits, works biologically. And yet, there is some undefined quality that separates us in a fundamental sense from every other creature or animal we have encountered on Earth. As smart as dolphins or dogs, or apparently one of the smartest animals is the octopus, as smart as they are, there still seems to be a difference of, it's a qualitative difference. There's just something that makes it completely different in a way of the way that we think, we feel, we organize, we recognize ourselves, whether we want to call it sentience or whatever, that makes us different in a fundamental sense. Even in all the ways we're very similar to, I don't know, chimpanzees or whatever, there is something that is still fundamentally different. And we would affirm this in our baptismal vows when we get to that part about, you know, respecting the dignity of every human being. That dignity comes because God made us in his image. Our intellects, our capacities, our emotions, whatever. If we mix and match stuff, I think we do a couple of things. We run the risk of exactly what Tozer warns against, and allow stuff to take an undue place in our heart. But I also think it gives us the easy way out. I know I wound up mentioning it in a sermon, but I think I talked about it in book study first. I just don't remember the book. Might have been the Dr. Brand book, unless it was one of the Space Trilogy books. But my New Testament professor in seminary, who said he hated it when people say I'm only human when they make a mistake or when they do something wrong. And he says, no, that we have an example of humanity in Jesus, and he doesn't sin. So we're actually subhuman when we do that. We're not only here, like, the example of humanity is not us screwing up. The example of humanity is Jesus. So when we fail to act like Jesus, we're acting something less than we are capable of, something less than human. And so when we just classify ourselves as another animal, but an animal with maybe technological advances or whatever, then I think that encourages us to think and to act in ways that are less than human.
Those other animals, whatever you're talking about, don't have that me, my, mine thing.
And I don't think they have that option. I'm going to talk about, I can talk about the intrinsic goodness of, say, a dog, because dogs are good. Cats are iffy. Dogs are clearly good. Never know where you stay with a cat. But a dog has no choice in its dogness. It is. And that's like why I would say it's always responding to its nature. Oh boy, can we ever go down a rabbit hole with this? This is where the medieval scholastics started getting accused of the angels dancing on heads of pins, because and that was kind of a made up thing, but they're talking about the nature of angels and angelic beings, and can an angel sin? And if they are pure thought, then what happens when their will is corrupted? Can an angel be redeemed? What happens when an angel does sin and falls? And all this kind of stuff to say, we have the ability to act contrary to our nature. I can be a real creep and choose to act in a loving fashion, at least for a moment. I can be a fundamentally good person and then choose to act in a very wicked or selfish manner. We can choose to act something less than the humanity of Jesus, or we can be his disciple and we can follow him and do what he does and live like he did. I don't think animals can do that. I mean, I guess I'm up to be, if I'm wrong, explain it somehow, but I don't see how you could. When is an octopus not an octopus? Like, even when they do really clever things or have expressed some kind of really interesting memory, when are they able to act contrary to their nature? And how would we know? But there is something about us, and it happens really early on. It's been a long time since I've given this particular example, but I remember the circumstances real well, because we were, Lula and I were traveling. I was in seminary, and I was traveling to interview for a job. And Jessie was born the middle of my second year in seminary. And so this would be my third year. And so she's a baby at this point. Not a newborn, but probably not quite a toddler. Very, very small still. Year-old maybe, if that. And so anyway, we're traveling, and we're in a hotel, staying the night on the way. And the three of us are kind of laying in bed watching TV or something, and Lula has Jessie, I don't know, maybe on her stomach or just sort of holding her or whatever. And I might have leaned over to give Lula a kiss on the cheek, or I might have leaned over to talk to her, something like that. And this baby, you would even call her a child. Like, she was absolutely no older than 16 months. Takes a swat at me and looks at me. It glares, like, don't you go messing with her. She belongs to me. And we were like, there was like this brief moment of shock for us, and then we started laughing because it's kind of adorable. But I remember even then, like, man, I just saw original sin. If the theological concept of original sin is like this brokenness or this taint imprinted on our souls, even from birth, no one ever taught her to take a swing at someone or to glare at them. And no one ever taught her that her mother belonged to her. But it was all there. And I'm not trying to say, children are wicked. That's not my point. But my point is, like, there's no way to escape it. It happens even before children are consciously taught things. There's something broken inside of us that says mine. And as soon as we say mine, what else can we take from that? What can you extrapolate from mine? By extension, what do you also say?
You're,
It's not yours. What
you're
else?
placing something in the place of God.
For sure. To go to the point of making it that important, where it has to be, grasped and clung to. I would even say, by extension, you're saying it's not God's. Not only is it not yours, it's not his either. Because whose is it?
It's mine.
You don't want to share.
And we're always telling small children to learn how to share and stuff like that. But isn't it something that we have to teach them? And that's not to say that children don't share naturally as well. I have seen a child be generous that I've not, you're not necessarily taught them in a particular way. I don't know where they've seen it, or maybe they've never seen it, but there's also love and fellowship and stuff like that seems to be inborn. But the whole mind thing, you don't have to teach them that either. You do not have to teach a child to grab a toy away from you. They all know how to do it. So Tozer is again talking about, and it is a very beautiful metaphor, I think, with a lot of explanatory power, but about the place in our hearts intended for God. And I've heard it described in a lot of various poetic ways, the throne of your heart. I think this would also be very much Blaise Pascal's The God-Shaped Hole or Vacuum. Anything that you try to put in there is not going to work because it was built for something. Imagine a key fitting in a lock. And some keys might fit in but it never turns it. It never gets all the tumblers just right. It never puts the pins where they need to be. Some keys are just so big, you can't even get them in the slots. Or they're so small, you can tell it's not going to engage. And some look like it could work. Maybe it's made from the same company, or it seems roughly the same shape. And you get it inside and you try to turn and nothing happens. Even the locking mechanism and the pins and the springs are all set and configured to respond to a very particular shape. And when that shape goes in, everything else is in its proper place. And the function does what it is intended to do, and it opens. What happens when we put anything else in that place of priority instead of God?
It isn't.
It isn't going to be the same. It's not going to work. What else?
Well, our life is not going to work.
A lot of life is not going to work. I believe you're right in that too. It becomes interconnected.
And I think once it happens, it's easier for it to happen again.
Easier for it to happen again, okay? Because you know, kind of if you're willing to give it a try, once that wall is down, isn't it much easier? There's a few kind of classic metaphors for this, is like knocking a wall down and creating a larger room. You don't have to go into the other room. You can choose to act like the barrier is still there, but once that wall is down, it's real easy to cross. The oft-repeated statistic that 50% of marriages end in divorce always sounds incredibly sad, and I'm not saying it isn't. But we all assume that means first marriages, and it doesn't.
Mhm.
The likelihood of a second marriage ending in divorce is enormously higher than a first marriage ending in divorce. It is not first marriages that have a 50% failure rate. The problem is it's too high. I'm not arguing for divorce, and I'm not saying these aren't serious and important. I'm just saying the actual first-time marriage divorce rate is way less than 50%. The statistics get very skewed because once people divorce and they marry again, they have a much, and it's way over 50% of a statistical probability of a second or third divorce. And that skews the overall numbers. And as sad as that is, I'm not, you know, it's just kind of a reality of life. But I would say there must be something to, once a divorce has happened, the option is on the table.
That's what I was just thinking. Once they found that easy out.
Well, and it could be a horrible out. It could be a terrible out. It could be a miserable out. But, you know, for whatever reason that's happening within these individual scenarios, and I don't intend to make light of any of it, but it is to say the statistics do point to second and third marriages failing at a much higher rate than first marriages. But when you hear about 50% of all marriages, that's where the statistic actually comes from. All marriages. And there does seem to be something with, you know, once the line has been crossed, it becomes difficult to reestablish. Not impossible, but I could think of reasons why it would become more difficult. So that's kind of something, sort of leading into another reason why, what happens when we put something else in the place of God on that throne that's intended for him, in that hole that's built for him. And I've said this repeatedly over the years, it's going to break your heart. It will hurt you. It will let you down. If you put something there that's not intended to be there, not only will other things kind of not go well, it can't hold it. It's like trying to prop up something heavy with something fragile. It might hold it for a second, and then eventually it's going to crush it. You put anything other than God in that most prominent place, it's not built to carry that kind of weight. You remove a load-bearing wall in a house,
Oh.
there's going to be problems sooner or later. How can something not God put in the position of ultimate prominence disappoint you or break your heart? What might an example be?
Money.
Money, okay? If that becomes your ultimate aim and your absolute highest priority, how can money, even if you have a lot of it, how can it break your heart?
Well, if you make some investments and they go sour, or that
Yeah,
some
right.
your friends could stop coming to visit you because they think you think you're too rich for them.
Yeah, so the first one is, what happens if you lose it? Just because you've accumulated it is no guarantee. That's why people with money spend a lot of time, effort, and energy keeping it or adding more. It might not last. And that other reason is it might change things for the negative. It is the reason why the phrase exists, how much is enough, or when is enough enough, is because that is a genuine experience that people, and you can put the accumulation of that wealth in almost any sort of way. There is I'm assuming it's been a long time since anyone has watched Chariots of Fire, because it came out in the early 80s, but it's a brilliant movie. It's a beautiful movie. It's still probably the greatest Olympic movie ever made, based off of a true story. And it's, tells the story of these two English runners. And, Eric Liddell, kind of the hero that I've mentioned before, and he's the one who says, he was a Seventh-day Adventist and he was going to be a missionary. And he was telling his sister, Jenny, I know God made me for China, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. And so that's this beautiful example of the concept of worship, using what we've been given to its utmost. And it glorifies God when we use what we've been given. And he's the one who wouldn't run because the race got scheduled on the Sabbath, and there's this huge drama, and he winds up being able to run in a different event, not his event, and yet still wins the gold. And it's this big triumphant moment. Well, the other sprinter is Harold Abrams, who runs, and he might be like the 100 meter or something. He also wins, but his life takes a tragic turn. He was at the top of the mountain. Now what? I have dedicated my life to achieving this moment, and I did it. Now what? And it was, he had struggled for many years. And haven't we encountered that in other, stories of famous people or celebrities or, champions in their field? You achieved something that took this enormous focus and hard work to be world-class at something. This is just this seems to be a psychological principle. To be world-class, the best, the absolute best at an endeavor, you have to be almost monomaniacal. You got to be focused on that one thing. And you hear stories about like Olympic gymnasts or something, and they're up at stupid o'clock in the morning training, and they never eat a candy bar, and they don't go to normal school, and they don't, go hang out with friends. And they do it for years. They, sometimes high-level athletes are sent away from families to live in academies and, eat, sleep, and breathe their endeavor. And so what happens when you win? What do you do?
they fall? They become depressed?
A lot of them do.
They don't
A
know.
lot of them
They don't
do.
know what to do with themselves.
You know, because I'm a college football fan, and several coaches have basically said the same thing, like championship coaches. We won the national championship. We celebrate tomorrow, let's say Sunday. Monday, it's back to work. You spent a career trying to get to this point, and you spent all season long and the off season preparing your players to achieve this absolute apex, and you got it. You give yourself one day, pat yourself on the back, kick up your feet, but then the next day, it's time to put that all away. Start over from scratch. And eventually that's got to wear on. When is enough enough? And there are coaches who have won national championships and within a few years have been fired.
Yeah.
That's the business. There are celebrities who seem to be on top of the world with more money than we can, practically envision. And they're famous, and people who've never met them talk about how much they love them, and they commit suicide. People who are, incredibly wealthy in a particular industry, and they will risk it all on bad behavior or on, they'll create illegal operations and scams just because they think they need more. These things don't satisfy us. At some point, whatever it is fades away, or it breaks, or it rusts out, or it doesn't support the weight anymore. I put everything I had into this and I got it. Now what? So the implication being, if our focus is on God, the key that fits the lock, the shape that fits the vacuum, the one who sits upon the throne. If he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, then the worry about it changing and fading and breaking, well, that's out the window. But also maybe just that sense of, we were talking about almighty and omnipotent and all-knowing and omniscient and all the all stuff. What more could we ask for that is not fulfilled in the presence of God? And to be frank, all the stuff that we tried to stick in there in the first place, where did that come from anyway? Because remember, we're born in poverty. We receive all good gifts from the Father of lights. So he kind of spends almost a full page wrapping this up with the story of Abraham. And that, as kind of instructive to the concept of, and these are actually Paul's words, that I possess nothing and yet possess everything. But it's very well linked to the life and the attitude of Abraham, that even before Christ, his faith is reckoned as righteousness. So what does he want us to take out of the Abraham story?
If God comes first and we trust him always, he will give us the best.
Yes. Yes. And how much trust do we give him?
All of our trust.
And when is enough enough?
There's never enough.
Yeah, right. And how do we see this in Abraham's life? Give me a few moments of trust.
Well, when he he holds the axe over his son.
right? And that's an enormous one, but it's not the first one.
When he goes up the mountain,
Goes up the mountain. So
when he brings the 10 Commandments back.
remember that his original name is not Abraham. It's Abram.
Abram.
That's Moses.
Yeah.
Moses. I'm getting them mixed up now.
I was gonna say something.
And where is Abram from? Where'd he grow up? Ur the Chaldees. So I want to say that's like in the Chaldees, kind of like in the rough area we would consider Iran. I think it's Chaldean is in that, it's in that area. So our story with this guy who's eventually going to be willing to sacrifice his son has to go all the way back to him living somewhere else his entire life. When God calls Abram, is Abram a young man or an old man?
Old
He's
man.
already an old
Already an
man.
old man. Is he well established or is he looking for help?
Well established.
Very well established, because God says, I want you to leave your home and your stuff. I've got a plan for you and a promise and a land and all this kind of stuff. Why in the world would Abram leave what he already has? It sounds like he's doing just fine. Thank you very much.
Because he was following what God asked him.
Yeah, and that takes an enormous amount of trust. You know, if you have ever left comfort for a promise, but its conclusion was unknown, then you know that that's not easy to do. But he does. What will be another trust moment for him?
Well, when they told him that Sarah was going to conceive and
Right.
bear a son, and he was an old man, and so was she, an old lady.
Yeah. Now, so he understands how life works, and we're just way too old for this. But he still trusts to the point where he tells Sarah, hey, God told me this is going to happen. And of course, you know, Sarah laughs, and she gets to remember that one for a good long time when God instructs her to name her child Isaac, which means laughter. So she can't ever say his name without being reminded of her initial response. But this is where Abram becomes Abraham, father of many nations. So how many kids does Abraham have?
One.
No, he had 2.
He does have 2, but
Oh.
through promise, he has the one. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
where does the other child come into play?
When he thought he couldn't conceive with Sarah, he
Yeah,
wanted
right.
to.
It's so Ishmael is actually the product not of his trust, but of his distrust. God has told me I'm going to have a child. We're obviously too old, duh. So God, God might be a little confused. So we'll take care of that. And so he has a child with Sarah's servant. And it's real weird and creepy where Hagar is actually on Sarah's lap when she gives birth. If you don't remember that they describe it.
Yeah.
So that Ishmael, it would seem, Sarah could feel like it was coming out of her. Boy, you're going a long way to make something that God said he was already going to provide. And of course, a lot of trouble came through that. That was not the intention, but that's what they did. And there's been trouble basically ever since. We believe historically and culturally that through Ishmael, comes many people groups of the Middle East, but most prominent being what we refer to as Arab. Ever been any trouble between the Arabs and the Israelis over the years? A little bit, a little bit. Is it connected way back then? Well, if it's not, well, it seems to keep happening over and over and over regardless, doesn't it? The lack of trust results in a consequence. When he does trust, it results in blessings. Sarah does the impossible, conceives a child. They trust, and it actually works. Now, still being a father of many nations sounds like a stretch if you only got the 2 kids and only one of them you're keeping because you're sending the other one away because it's causing too much strife in the family. And then God wants you to what? Kill him. What? Where is the trust in that story? It's an awful story. Frightening story. As a father, I hate a lot about this story.
It sounded like he stayed awake the whole night thinking.
Yeah, this is horrible. Abraham shows his obedience, and there are times where that is not easy. It's the last thing you want to do. Now, this is not described in Genesis, but it is described in the New Testament, and Tozer will reference this. How has Abraham convinced himself it's going to work out?
That God will bring his son back to life.
God will bring his son back to life. I'm going to have to go through with it. The worst thing I can possibly imagine doing. But God will reverse it. But I'm going to have to do it. And so he is willing to go all the way through. And just, again, I'm thinking as a dad, every step you take up that mountain is so incredibly sick to your stomach.
I thought.
And when Isaac says, "Where's the sacrifice, Dad?" Oh my gosh. So, but that was not God's intention to raise Isaac from the dead. Abraham is stopped, but at the last moment. This is where I think the point of Tozer is. Not just talking about the trust and the willingness to sacrifice, but the result of it in us after the fact. This is Paul saying, I possess nothing, yet I possess everything. If you are willing to let go of something and the Lord lets you keep it, all the pressure is off. You can enjoy it for what it is. And I'm thinking there might have been times where we have all done this. I have had in various times fervent, desperate prayers over a sick child. That this child belongs to you, Lord. And when the child is healed and restored, what that means, how you feel, and just the difference in perspective that everything that follows after something like that. He is not going to argue against stuff. He's going to argue when you don't count on it and you get it. It's a beautiful and gracious thing. Enjoy it. But if you demand it and you cling to it, you actually won't wind up keeping it anyway, and you'll be miserable. Tom, how tightly should you grip a tennis racket when you play?
Can you hear him?
No.
How tightly should you grip a tennis racket when you play? How tightly should you grip your tennis racket when you play?
I don't hold my tennis racket very tightly.
What happens when you hold it too tight?
When
What happens if you hold it too tight?
you lose flexibility. You're rigid.
You lose control.
Yeah.
Your control is terrible when you hold it too tight. You think you're
Yeah.
doing the thing by gripping onto it more tightly, and you're actually making everything worse. If you have a loose grip, though, you hold it, but you're not smashing it, you accomplish far more. When we are, what's the old saying? Like, if you set it free and it returns to you, this is, if our hearts are on who God is and not what he gives us, won't he still give us good things? But if our focus is on what we get out of the deal,
You don't get it.
we might not get it at all. We might lose it. So I think this is where he is trying to continually nudge us, not against the stuff, but that our joy should be in the Lord. And all these things shall be added unto us. But if you go for the stuff first, you will miss the true joy of God's presence. And you're going to lose that stuff anyway. It's a bad deal. It's a bad deal all the way around. What else?
Wow.
Okay. So we will meet again next Wednesday, and we'll have our next chapter to do. Because these chapters are relatively short, and because we're only doing like an hour, when we get to the Wednesday and Holy Week, I am happy to still do a class. It shouldn't impede anything, but if you guys want to take it off, we certainly can. The Wednesday of Easter week, we will still have a couple of chapters to go at that point. We can talk about what we're going to do closer to that. I don't think we will meet in person. We could still have a class, but I think I would probably do it remotely. Easter week is one of those few times where I can sleep the sleep of the just, and I often try to get out of town, if only for a couple of days. So we can talk about when we get closer, if we want to have a class or if we want to take a week off. But if we do have a class, we will probably do it like everybody on Zoom rather than some people here at church. Does that make sense?
I think you should have the week off and not have to worry about it.
We'll see when we get there. We'll get a little closer to it and see what happens. Okay, everybody good to go?
Yes, thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.